Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Besant Lodge and to the beginning of our month-long tarot series, a type of programming that we haven't done for a very long time. We always have every year, near New Year's, we have a public reading for the United States. So that we have never abandoned, but we haven't done much tarot otherwise, and this time we will. And you have to forgive me for being tardy in some of the provisions, because I have a number of books, including my own book on the tarot, on order from our publisher, and I think I ordered it a little bit too late, but during this 1 month period they are going to come around. That is the volume that was first called let's see, what was it called first? See, it's been now out in the new, it was called, it is now called The Fool's Pilgrimage in the second edition. In any event, so we will have that book, which is quite a useful, has proven quite a useful book and quite highly regarded by various people in the field, and then we will have some others as well. So I propose to sort of wander all over the field, whichever the field is, in this case, to sort of, especially, have a seat, Jerry, to skirt the vast field of the tarot from various angles, and also perhaps begin with a little personal experience that may or may not be of interest to you, but the way it is with people of my age, you know, they always have a story about everything. Reminiscences. So I will start with a reminiscence which goes back to my student days in the city of Innsbruck in Austria, the capital of the state of Tyrol, where I went to a pre-university, Hungarian pre-university high school in Exzel, and subsequently to Innsbruck University, and consequently I was in need of quarters, shall we say, and I found a nice little place to sleep in an apartment house at number 9 Kaiser Franz Josef Straße, named after the great Emperor Franz Josef, and it is in that place where I first encountered, well, not exactly the tarot, but a close relative and derivative of the tarot. There were several of us students staying in that quite nice, large, old-fashioned apartment house and apartment, and so we, in order to provide for cheap entertainment, we talked the landlady and her daughter, who were living there also, into making a card-playing party most every evening. So we would go into the very large kitchen with a beautiful big table and all of that, and there we were invited to play a game that I had never seen before, and that had many more cards than one generally had with playing cards that you would play whist or any of the other games with, and the deck was called Tarok, T-A-R-O-C-K, and so I inquired about it because I knew the name Tarok, but I had never seen a deck before, and so they explained to me that it was still fairly popular in Austria because it was the favorite game of the late Emperor Franz Joseph, after whom the street was named where we were living, and that largely in his memory, but also otherwise because of its intricate and beautiful symbolism, it was a very popular deck of cards. So there we were pretty much every evening drinking tea and playing with the tarot cards. The first thing that I noticed, because it is a direct derivative with very few differences of the tarot, the first thing that I noticed was that it was very popular. You could find that deck of cards in many, many places, and that it was a much larger deck than the usual deck of cards, and that was very largely due to the fact that it had an entire set of what there were at that time were called trump cards, and which here, in connection with the tarot, we call the major arcana. And with these trump cards, the deck was immensely enriched, and it was really quite an intricate process to win a card game with that many cards and with such intricate symbolism. So this was the Tarok. And then later on, we're discussing the issue with various fellow students and people around. I received the information that there was a deck of cards which probably was the fountain and origin of this kind of deck of cards, which is the origin, was the original, and which is called tarot, with an O-T at the end rather than an O-C-K, which was the one that we played. But both decks were noted by the fact that they had an entire large number of cards, or 22 cards or so, that were considered the trump cards or the major arcana, which in the card game would, as you might think, and I'm not trying to switch over now into presidential politics, but they are the trump cards, quite without reference to American politics, and they because of the great availability of these trump cards, it's really quite an intricate card game, and we were usually up sort of till around midnight playing those cards and drinking tea and having a real good time in memory of the Emperor Franz Joseph. So in any event, that was my first encounter with something closely related to the tarot. And then subsequently, quite a few years later, when I came to the United States and after a few months ended up here in Los Angeles, then I encountered a couple of people who were quite active in a local organization that is still here, and it is really one of the principal places of study of the tarot cards for many years in the world, and it's called the Builders of the Adytum. And don't ask me what an adytum is, because I don't know, and apparently I never was all that interested in that either. But let us say it's a Kabbalistic organization that was founded by a very fine gentleman whom I didn't have the pleasure of meeting any longer because he went to the other side of existence just before I got here, by the name of Dr. Paul Foster Case. I knew many of his disciples, but not him, and who really has, up to this day, I think, is one of the best books on the Tarot Major Arcana is by his hand. You might want to look for it. And he was from the Golden Dawn tradition, meaning the tradition of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which was a very active and very prominent, and also, as this almost always happens, slightly controversial reputation around the turn of the century, and to which the young Aleister Crowley and the great poet William Butler Yeats, a number of other people belonged, and which made much of the importance and the transformative value and the information to be derived from the tarot cards. Now, what the Golden Dawn, the Order of the Golden Dawn, Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn practiced, that their members would have to create their own tarot deck. Now, if we made that some kind of a rule in our tarot activities, I bet that the number of our students would decrease very rapidly, because they had to draw them themselves, they had to color them themselves, and in accordance with the rules of the Kabbalistic Tarot, so quite a bit of work. And although it was not, these rules were not always followed the same way. In fact, I encountered only one hand-drawn deck of tarot cards of the Golden Dawn variety at one of my lectures on the subject of the tarot in Portland, Oregon, where a man came up to me and said, "What do you think of this?" So here was a hand-drawn, very beautifully drawn entire tarot deck according to the Golden Dawn rules, but without color. And he was obviously interested in selling it. And I, on the other hand, was not really interested in buying, primarily because I felt that this kind of a handmade Golden Dawn tarot was so rare, and this was at the height of the national interest, maybe international interest in the tarot, that I didn't want to cheat the man. I wasn't going to buy it for what I could afford. So I recommended some people to him whom he might contact, and I got rid of it. In any event, at the time of when the interest in the tarot grew, I also was drawn to it, in part because of some of these friends who belonged to builders of the Adytum, and others like the late Dr. Israel Regardi, who became quite a good friend and who helped me a great deal with tarot work and related matters. And so I found the tarot to be a very valuable adjunct to one's life, and one from which multiple layers of valuable meaning could be derived. I also learned at that time, which I probably should have known earlier owing to my origins, that wherein I'm a Hungarian, and we had a great, large gypsy population in Hungary, and they were, of course, great cartomancers, that is, people who tell fortunes by way of cards, and the cards that they used were much of the time, but not all the time, really of a sort of archaic tarot variety. So I said, oh yeah, these are the cards that the gypsies used. By the way, I might insert a little critical remark there too, that the gypsies, the name for gypsy in French is bohemien, which actually means somebody from Bohemia, because the gypsies, being a wandering folk and of somewhat questionable character, was attributed by various nations to each other. So in Hungary we used to refer to the wandering gypsies as the Romanian gypsies, which was a derivative of what they called themselves, namely the Romani people. Rome in the gypsy language means a man, so that really just means humans. But every nation blames the gypsies on somebody else. So it was quite common, apparently, at an earlier period to imagine that the gypsies came from Bohemia. And Bohemia is the country of the Czechs, where Prague and Brünn and all of these places are located. And so Bohemian literally means the Czechs. So this became mistranslated into English, and you can still find the book with the title, this is bought by the great French magical scholar and scholar of the tarot, Papus, in civilian life known as Dr. Gérard Encourse, and who kept it that way, and so that the deck became the tarot of the Bohemians, which is a misnomer. It's a very good book. Don't let me keep you from reading it, and it has a lot of valuable things to say about the tarot, but the title is completely mistaken because of the convergence of the French language and others. So in any event, now with that bit of probably somewhat boring personal reminiscent introduction, let's move further. It would seem, according to the various students of this matter, and there are many, and some of them were really very thorough and very scholarly people, among them Arthur Edward Waite, who was in part responsible for one of the most popular tarot decks over the last century, and still now, the so-called Waite tarot. So Arthur Edward Waite and a number of other people who had all employed themselves to somehow design a tarot deck which would be less archaic, less medieval in look, and therefore more popular and more easily dealt with, and who then also became often instrumental in designing a tarot deck that would be responding to those requirements. And Arthur Edward Waite, a great Kabbalistic scholar and an early member of the Golden Dawn, was one of these. And he had a disciple, a young lady artist by the name of Pamela Coleman Smith in England. Arthur Edward Waite was actually an American who then became expatriate living in England, but Pamela Coleman Smith was English, and so she, under Waite's direction, designed a new tarot deck, which came to be known for a number of decades as the Waite deck, and now it is a historical curiosity, which has undergone various changes, and finally in the probably the late 1960s or thereabouts, was revised primarily in terms of the color scheme, because the Waite deck, if you find an original Waite deck, which I think are fairly expensive now, the colors are very pale. This was undoubtedly due to difficulties with printing at that time, because that would have been printed in the 1920s. And so along came a gentleman from Hollywood, from the acting profession, who was also quite a good artist, by the name of Frankie Albano. And Mr. Albano said, this tarot deck is not colorful enough, it's not dramatic enough. He was quite right. And so he designed a new color scheme, which is quite bright, although not excessively bright. And as you will undoubtedly see, because these are the ones that are also projected, it arrests one's attention, and it really is an important and rather dramatic device for the utilization of the cards, because it stands out in its color scheme and is very nicely designed, of course, by Pamela Coleman Smith, but also quite colorful and therefore quite useful. Now, matters of this sort are highly individual and personal, and I would testify in my own behalf that the weight of what is you would see on the wrapper, on the box, the Waite Albano deck is probably better suited for the study of the tarot and of tarot divination of all the many available decks. Now, it's not necessarily the most artistically perfect. Probably these things are, of course, highly individual, and one judges them individually, but I would say that probably artistically most exciting deck is the one by Lady Frida Harris, who was a disciple and close friend of Aleister Crowley. And so the deck, especially the major arcana, bears the imprint of Crowley's magical orientation as well as of the Golden Dawn background. It's a very beautiful deck, but I prefer not to use it because, particularly for divinatory purposes, I feel that it's a little bit too complicated and too busy. When a tarot card is so rich in its imagery and and consequently in its symbolism, that it is more likely to confuse the people who are using it than anything else, then that's a difficulty. And so I would say the often called the Crowley deck is a very fine and very artistic deck, but as far as using it for tarot readings, that is for divination, I would say that its use is limited just by way of its highly artistic character, although it was inspired certainly by a magical scholar of major proportions, who believe it whether you like him or not, which Edward Aleister Crowley, the great beast, certainly was. So let us say now, I think the Waite deck and the Waite Albano deck are still the most popular, and I agree with their popularity because they lend themselves to a basic, simple, and accurate divinatory and magical interpretation, even if the reader is not terribly familiar with that field. So otherwise, in other words, you take a card of the Waite deck or the Waite Albano deck, and you just sort of quiet yourself for a little and look at it, and various impressions will come to you. And if you pursue the subject further, then what the interesting thing will be that the ideas that came to your mind, the images and interpretations that arose in your imagination will prove to be Kabbalistically and by way of Golden Dawn material quite accurate. So that in itself is an important characteristic. Also, I would say that unlike some others, and I won't even include Lady Frida Harris's work because it's very artistic and very beautiful, it's nice to look at. Just like there are some people who are nice to look at. And then you find out that maybe they are not as nice inside as they are to look at. So you have to be, being of such disposition, I apply this primarily to the still existing and still very important female gender, okay? So denounce me please to the politicians. I'm ready to be taken in irons to Washington for my heresy, because we are kind of getting to that. This is the Holy Inquisition is reborn in a most unholy shape in our country, and it wasn't a very good idea way back then. And you know what? It is not a very good idea now either. We don't need any Inquisition. In any event, I don't know how I got on that tangent, but I did. But let us say, if now I'll go over to the next subheading, shall we say, that being that the the tarot cards have been used probably primarily throughout the centuries and in various ways right up to the present time, primarily for divination. Now, divination is not just a fancy synonym for fortune telling, but rather it is an alternative to fortune telling. When it comes to things mystical, magical, occult, whatever you want to call them, theosophical, Rosicrucian, anthroposophical, whatever, you always have to keep in mind that the profundity of the instrumentality that you are dealing with is due to the capacity of the particular device to evoke profound and often highly unusual and complex intuitive experiences within the individual. So when you are or are going to be or are aspiring to be a tarot card reader, from my own little experience, which sometimes in the past when I did more of it was quite dramatic, I have come to the conclusion that these principles are the principles of divination. And I have discussed the matter with people who were quite experts, for instance, in other divinatory modalities, such as the Chinese I Ching, as some people pronounce it, or I Ching, as most other people pronounce it, that it also has the same capacity. It evokes a symbolic impression that is in some ways related to the intentional inquiry of the person who wants to have the reading with the I Ching or with the tarot. So what you need to remember that the magic, if you want to call it that, and I like the word magic, you know, oh goodness, magically, a magical-oo, a bibbidi-babbidi-boo. You still remember that? Anyway, we are quite close in location to Disney, you know, so we remember the Disney movies and their various songs and so forth. But the issue being that the magic is not in the cards, I'm sorry to say. If it were, I could have a thriving business selling tarot decks, but it isn't. And I am not inclined to prevaricate to tell you that it is. But the magic is in you. The tarot card, however, has, if properly treated, has the capacity to evoke from you certain indwelling faculties of imagination, of insight, of foresight, in other words, on an other than ordinary nature. So what you have in the card is a symbolic inducement to your own deeper knowledge, to your own deeper wisdom. Now comes the question, of course, because going clear back to my friends, the gypsies and so forth, you know, the sort of the popular issue has always been that the fortune teller will tell your fortune and thereby mean the future. And there I frequently recall the immortal words of the Hollywood prophet Exzel, whom some of you who are not as old as I, no one is as old as I, but still of a more mature age, may have remembered, because he had a nationally syndicated television show called Exzel Predicts. He had almost completely white albino hair. He lived on Las Palmas Avenue, and he was a very interesting man. I wouldn't say that his forecastings, his prophecies always came true. In fact, sometimes they were so wild that they couldn't be true no matter what. He would pick some usually formerly perhaps better known and now superannuated actress and say that she's going to be the next president of the United States. Well, in those days, shall we say, our expectations of the presidency were still a little different from the way they are now. But of course, those things never came true, and all kinds of strange predictions, which were often ended up being somewhat comical. But at the same time, I am bound to admit that Exzel was an unusual man who did have some unusual insights. I'm not really sure that he did much with the tarot. I think that his prophetic gifts, such as they were simply evoked by his own volition. He didn't need any visual inducement to them like a tarot reader. But he was a very interesting man, and one of his sort of common sayings that he always uttered on the television was, "We are all interested in the future, because that is where you and I are going to spend the rest of our lives." And then the music came on, Exzel Predicts, very, very dramatic and somewhat comical as well. In any event, obviously the desire for knowing the future is one that is deeply rooted in the human psyche, and I would say from a depth psychological point of view, having studied both Freud and Jung over many years, I would say that it is a depth psychologically correct assumption that the desire for the disclosure of the future comes from the deeper side, the very unconscious of the human, what Freud called the unconscious. So at the same time, that being the case, that right away indicates that we are dealing here with not just, well, she or he has the gift. He can see into the future. I think that's occasionally true. I have seen evidence of it on a personal level with various people, others that I heard. My father always used to say one that occurred to a relative of ours who was, as our people usually did, of our family and so forth, was out horseback riding over his lands in northern Hungary, and he encountered a gypsy wagon. In those, now they have what do you call them? Sort of huge station wagons and things like that. And so even the gypsies modernized. What can you do? And motorized. But in any event, he encountered, those were covered wagons, very romantic, and in there sat usually a mature man who was driving the horses, 2 or 3 children, and then 2 or 3 women, and the women had the decks of cards with them, which often were either related to or were actually tarot cards, because the tarot cards are it would seem, according to fairly reputable research, they are one of the earliest, the oldest card decks in the world. And that's a pretty big claim, but it has not been contradicted effectively by anybody. So anyway, this gentleman, friend, relative of ours, wrote up to the gypsies, hey guys, what you doing? You know, this and that. And they said, oh, Excellency, would you like us to read your palm? Would you like us to read the cards? So he said, okay, go ahead, whatever you want to do. So they did the cards, and I think they did some palmistry as well. And the gypsy woman became very disturbed, and she said, Your Grace, Excellency, or whatever she called him, I cannot tell you what is coming to me, what I see. And she says, come on. I says, I came to you because I want this service, I'm going to pay you, don't you worry, and I can take it. So the gypsy woman said, Your Grace, I see a gallows, which of course was not a very welcome disclosure to this gentleman. So anyway, he paid her, everything was all right. This was in the 1840s, mid-1840s, where there was a lot of political turbulence around there. So pretty soon there was an uprising against the Austrian alliance, and this particular gentleman was involved in it, and he was condemned by a military court, and he was hung by the neck till death. So my father said that this came to him from his father, from my grandfather, and that it was definitely something that has happened, and that really convinced him about at least the occasional veracity of the gypsy fortune tellers as well. But what we need to keep in mind that fortune telling, particularly dealing with the future, as popular as it is, as desirable as so many people consider it, that fortune telling is a debased form of what since ancient days was called divination. And divination, of course, derives its name from divinity and comes from the ancient polytheistic world of Greece and Rome and perhaps Egypt, whereon, in order to secure some help, and helpful information, probably more than anything else, people would resort to consulting the divinities, because these were polytheistic cultures, and they had, as we get it in the history books, many gods, but that is also a somewhat misleading term, because when you look at the ancient divinities, who would have been very often involved in being called in divinatory procedures, you are dealing with something very, very different than the Jehovah God from the Old Testament. And I'm not putting anybody down, but let's say even in the divine households there are different animals. It's a great big divine zoo, and there are many different animals in it. And the monotheistic God of the Bible is one, but the divinities of the so-called pagans are another. And what really the belief of the ancient people was, and I would say they had considerable evidence sustaining in this, that there are beings around who don't have physical bodies like we do, but they are souls. They have reasoning capacity, and they have the ability to discern various factors and conditions in life that ordinary people don't have. And therefore, they may disclose circumstances about the future or about the past, or for that matter about the present, because you know the present is actually just as mysterious and just as potentially revelatory than the past or the future. But you see, we are caught on the time track, and so if we can shift onto another aspect of time, such as the past, such as the future, then we think that we have done something monumental. While really, if I may say so, the important thing is to discern certain elements in life which are neither of the past, nor of the present, nor of the future, but of eternity. They are there. And we have the capacity to contact them. And if we do that, then perhaps we have really referred to what the ancients would have called the gods and the goddesses or the divinities. Because there are, let's say, entities in the universe who, when properly approached, would respond to requests about fate, the conditions, the concerns of people. And they will avail themselves of instrumentalities whereby such disclosures can be made. Now, it is my view, based on a good many years of experience with the matter, that the tarot cards, when properly treated and when insightfully interpreted, are of that nature, that they can be an instrumentality that refers to intelligences, helpful influences that under the right conditions are able to make disclosures to an incarnate human being that may be useful to him or her. And that there is a great deal of evidence indicating that, and that divinations of various kinds, fortune-telling of various kinds can be found among very primitive people, people of very archaic cultures, as well as among people of much more advanced cultures and so forth. That these possibilities of taking recourse to certain intelligences, we don't have to name them anything, that are around, and that if properly approached may give answers, may make disclosures to the individual. Now, to some of you this may appear as a little too anthropomorphic. In other words, making into humans and into human personalities the spirits of the air, and personifying perhaps certain conscious forces that are about. I have no objection to that kind of interpretation, but let us say when you are confronted with a good tarot reader, and there is a good rapport between the reader and the, I don't know what should we call it, the readee, the querent and the one who asks, then some important, significant disclosures may be made which one should pay attention to. I will forever blame myself for at least a couple of incidents in my life where, without a request even, I was moved to do a tarot spread, short tarot spread on a particular matter. And the tarot spread indicated something very dire. And if I had had more gumption at the time, I would have acted on it and informed the individual for whom this was. And I will never conceal anymore the result of any divinatory operation, because I have seen how accurate they can be, and when that accuracy devolves into something deleterious, in this case a medical situation, it would have been much, much better if I had just disclosed and opened it up. But here was this friend living in another place who, let's say, he really had his hopes very powerfully placed on a medical procedure. He really thought that this would give him a big lease on life, instead of it brought him death. And I always felt that if I just warned him, well, then at least I would live with the consciousness that I have warned him, which this way I wasn't able to do. So it's important to pay attention to these things, and once again, to listen to your own intuition. All right, is this something important enough that I should tell the full force of this disclosure to the individual involved or not? And if you are, then you should do so, because our higher intuition, our internal inspiration is most of the time far more authoritative than almost any other source that we could resort to. And this again it's not it's nothing terribly unusual. The thing is, you can train yourself. Now I really want an answer from some particular divinatory modality, whether it's the tarot card or anything. I really want an answer. And you condition yourself to that determination. And if you do it, and if you do it enough, and you become somewhat expert in these states of consciousness, then the chances are that you will be able to find disclosures of an important nature, whether they are for yourself or somebody else, and that whatever you discover in that fashion will be of a valuable nature. Once again, it doesn't always have to do with the future, because contrary to the Hollywood prophet, we should be interested in other aspects of our lives in addition to the future. because undoubtedly we will spend the rest of our life there, but that's just a joke anyway. So we have to be careful, and we have to be somewhat reverent, because whatever you use, and of course, that most astrologers I know are resentful if I call their art, the astrological art, divination. No, it's not divination. Well, okay, so what is it? And they can't really tell you. But I think that most astrologers have sort of fallen for the pseudo-scientific mythos that just because you figure out the various positions and there's mathematics involved and there are actual celestial bodies up there that you are talking about and so forth, that therefore you are practicing a science. Well, most scientists would not agree. But of course it doesn't really matter much. But what matters is that both in astrology and, I dare say, in other forms of divination, your insight, your ability to read the signs that are given to you and to interpret them correctly is present. Now, I could go on with this, but I'll just mention one little thing. Obviously, I went to a church-related school. I had Latin for 8 years of my youth, and I studied a lot of ancient, particularly Roman history, and therefore I became familiar, at least on paper, with the different divinatory modalities that were practiced in Rome. And also it's important to remember that the Romans, as smart cookies as they were, I mean, look, there are only, to my knowledge, there are only 2 people in the history of the world that we know of who had conquered the world and kept it for a long time. And they are the Romans and the British. Now, I know that maybe George Washington or Benjamin Franklin, who were after all transposed Brits anyway, would argue about it a little bit, but that is the fact. So let's say now to the Romans. When some years ago we were in Rome, we came from Tivoli with a train and then got off at the railroad station, and I looked up in the sky and I was amazed. A huge flock of birds, seemingly of the same kind, the same genus, birds, but hundreds of them were flying around and making strange and not usually seen forms and figures in the air. Sometimes an 8, sometimes a circle. Sometimes they were going clockwise, sometimes they were going counterclockwise. And meanwhile they were emitting the most interesting shrieks. And I came to my mind, but this is what the Romans did, what they called augury. An augury is someone who reads a meaning into the flight of birds. Now, I like birds, and I prefer them flying than doing some other things, but let's say it's important to see that something that ordinarily would be put down to a trivial happening of nature can be interpreted in a divinatory sense, and some divinatory meaning can be derived from it. And there were many others, because there were augurs and there were haruspices, and some of them really rather distasteful practices, such as taking the warm entrails of a recently slaughtered animals, preferably an owl, because the owls are a symbol of wisdom, and then looking inside, and apparently looking at this disgusting object would put people in a somewhat altered consciousness. They didn't have to take any drugs for that, but just looking at it would do it, and then various ideas would come to them. So in any event, here we were in Rome, seeing these birds performing the most astonishing feats in the air, and I said, all right, now if we are good diviners, we are going to figure out what these birds are going to tell us. I'm sorry to say, not too much meaning came to us as the result of it, but it's certainly a most intriguing sight that happens. So let's say there's almost nothing in the world, especially if you go to various places, to Asia, to Africa, to Australia and New Zealand and Europe and America and so forth, that almost no practice that has not been put to some divinatory use. And you can bet your BP, as they said one time, that the people who would take recourse to these divinatory modalities in turn did that because it works for them. And it disclosed things to them that they wanted to know. And it became a part of their guidance in life. And if that can be accomplished, I think then that it's a very good and very important thing. Now, I think I've probably already taken a great deal of time, but now, as I mentioned, one of the distinguishing marks of the tarot deck, right off the bat, as we can say, is the fact that it is really at least two, if not more than two, decks of cards put together. And one of these decks is the one that you see there, and this is what back in Austria we call the trumps, without reference to any American politician, and the trumps because they are of greater value in a game than other cards, and they trump the other cards, they are of higher value. And these are mostly by tarot students called the major arcana, an arcanum meaning really a secret, so you might say the major instrument, the major modality. And there's something that you need to remember about the major arcana, however, because one of the most important keys, let us say, to the discovery of their meaning and to their use is not apparent on the surface. But there was a clever Frenchman who called himself by the nom de plume of Eliphas Lévy. His secular name was Alphonse Louis Constant, and he translated the French into Hebrew. And so Alphonse became Eliphas, Louis became Lévy, and Constant became, let's see, what did it become? Well, in any way, it became Eliphas Lévy. Now, this gentleman was really a highly intuitive and very learned mid-19th century Frenchman. He studied in a Catholic seminary, but had left that one early and lived to mature age and died in 1875 in Paris, which was a significant here. For one thing, it was the year, as some of you know, of the foundation of the Theosophical Society in New York City, and you know, various other signs. So Eliphas Levi was the man who called attention to something that existed all along, but that seemingly people didn't pay too much mind to, as the saying goes, and that was that the major arcana, the trump cards of the tarot, are 22 in number, and that a very important feature of the great diagram, the sacred diagram of the Kabbalah, the tree of life, the Etz Chaim as it is called in Hebrew, has 22 paths, 22 channels, whereby its 10 Sephirot, the 10 vessels, are connected with each other. And that these paths, in turn, have attributed to them, or can use the attributions of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, which can with equal facility, or perhaps even greater facility, be also connected with and attributed to the major arcana of the tarot. So Eliphas Levi called attention to the fact that, all right, guys, you notice this. You may use these cards for divination, fortune telling, whatever you want to do. They're very interesting cards, but there is something unusual here, because being a great student of that subject, he said, something that has such a close relationship to the secret wisdom of Israel as the Kabbalah, which is the way it's supposed to be pronounced. So a Hebrew teacher told me once that because of that, there is something mysterious here. There is something sacred here. There is something unusual here. And that unusual feature has to be discovered and perhaps utilized. So this then continued and was taken up by various people, particularly of the magical order, Golden Dawn and so forth, and due to the correspondences of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet and the 22 major arcana of the tarot, an entire mystical, magical system came to the surface. I wouldn't say it was discovered. It was only discovered in the sense that it was only known to a very few people before that. But there it was, so that made the beginning for what you might say the Kabbalistic tarot, wherein each card of the major arcana can be attributed to one Hebrew letter, and by way of that Hebrew letter to one of the paths or channels of the tree of life. So that really opened up now an entire new aspect of the tarot, because now the tarot, owing to the major arcana attributions, came to be connected in the minds of many students, probably the majority of them, with the tree of life of the Kabbalah and all the mystical and magical attributions that exist regarding these various portions of the tree of life, and even the ability of raising one's consciousness by way of meditations that often included the 22 cards of the major arcana themselves. And I think that we probably still have one of my little books on the tarot there. If not, it should be coming in with the post pretty soon. And that's what I did in that book. I took the 22 cards of the major arcana and used them for the purpose of contemplation and meditation and the evoking of certain meanings and faculties and insights that can be contacted by way of these images. So that what you have now, in addition to all its other utilities with the tarot cards, you have a system implicit in the tarot by way of the major arcana of raising your consciousness from physicality at the bottom of the tree of life, if you can envision that, from physicality to spirituality, from the human to the divine, and that this has been done over the ages, can be done now, and that this is really a very helpful practice for those who are intent upon transforming and raising their consciousness in a useful and orderly fashion. So let's say the tarot received a new big shot in the arm, if that medical analog can be used, in the latter part, well, in the middle part of the 19th century, when Eliphas Levi made these correlations. And these correlations remained. And I know that, and you probably may have encountered some people like that, because Orthodox Jewish scholars and rabbis and so forth are not terribly favorably disposed to this combination of tarot card. What the heck, it's a playing card. A playing card in the Holy Kabbalah, what are you doing? You know, you're desecrating our symbolism. But it's not really true, because the symbolism is there, and let's say, not only intellectual, but spiritual benefits of a major nature have been gained by people who used the major arcana of the tarot in that fashion, and that it is a very beautiful and a very useful practice, and therefore I would recommend my little book. And also there is another book, I think it's just called The Tarot by Paul Foster Case, which is obviously not as detailed as mine, you know, that, which indicates that particular practice and how it is to be done and how it can benefit the individual. So let's say some of the discovery and the disclosure more than the discovery, because I'm sure that a lot of people would, deal with the 22 major arcana, and who had some knowledge of the Kabbalistic tree of life and the Hebrew alphabet would look at it, geez, there must be a connection. But it was only Eliphas Levi who came out in the open with it, and had really thereby started a whole new magical, mystical approach, both to the Tarot and to the Kabbalah. And I know I discussed this once at a meeting with the late Professor Gershon Scholem, the greatest scholar of Jewish mysticism in modern times, and he was pretty put out by, he says, no, you shouldn't connect the Kabbalah with cards. I said, we were talking in German. He's German, Jewish. He moved after the Hitler years. He moved alive to Israel, but he came for various events here, and I met him here. And so I told him, but so I had a figurative trump card in my head, because I said to him, but Professor, all I can tell you is it works. You know, I have used that practice, and it works. He was petrified. And then he said, well, I cannot argue with your experience. If that was your experience, that is your experience. We have to respect each other's experience. And I said, danke schön, Herr Professor. So, in any event, let's see, that was a very important rediscovery, discovery, addition, or whatever it was, when then all of a sudden the Kabbalistic connections, the connections of the 22 major arcana with the 22 paths on the Tree of Life, the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet was discovered, and it's sort of a whole new chapter of both tarot study and esoteric Kabbalistic study was discovered at that time. Now, what we need to remember, however, and I know I'm long-winded and all of that, and that's it's probably also an affliction of old age. You know, there's something inside of you that tells you, you know what? You might not have an opportunity again to give this lecture. So put everything into it that you can. I said, oy vey, you know, Kabbalistically, of course. But let us say we need to keep in mind, at least at this point, that what we have here, what the major arcana, of course, are, let's say, from a mystical, magical point of view, and from a therefore Kabbalistic point of view, that is a very important disclosure, and the major arcana are worthy of a great deal of study and meditation and prayer, for that matter, because they have truly very profound meanings. And this needs to be kept in mind. But at the same time, we need to remember that that's only 22 cards of the tarot deck. So what about the rest of the tarot deck? Well, that is where, let's see, we can say that there is an other deck of cards, which are the lesser arcana, or whatever they may be called, that is combined with these, and that sort of leads up to them. And my feeling from the very beginning, when I first contacted tarot, was, aha, this is what we have. Lower self, higher self. The lower self has having to do with the minor arcana, which are divided into 4 suits, just out of which really developed all the suits of the various playing cards that we used to call French cards, the ones that you play various other games with and so forth. But that being the case, the 4 suits of the tarot, and then added to them the 4 suits yet have, each of the suits has 4 court cards, in which the qualities of that suit are intensified and sort of concentrated. So now when we get to this, and 10 ordinary cards. So the number 10, good Kabbalistic number, number 4, which also may have to do with the 4 olams, the 4 worlds of the Kabbalah. All of these are there. Now, I am not a numerologist. already as a little child, I hated numbers. And I hated to fiddle with them. And I absolutely detested the multiplication tables. And that was I was firmly believed, I think, for many years of my childhood, that the multiplication tables were the work of the devil. In any event, of course, if you are multiplying your own money or something like that, then maybe that would not be the case. But let's say, but what you have here is you can play a numbers game, because ever since Pythagoras and Maimonides and people like that, the people, whether they were Greeks or Jews or whoever, they were all terribly interested in numbers. And the numbers mysticism, and then these numbers mean this, these numbers mean that. And while I didn't share that attachment to numbers, I knew that it's important. Okay, all right, now we actually have some of the pictures of the others. There we are. So here we have now the minor arcana, as they are most often known, and the minor arcana have have 10 basic cards. Those are the ones that you see on this side. But in this case, we have the we are dealing with the suit of pentacles. That's one of the 4 suits, and its symbol is a coin with a 5-pointed star on it. Pentacle. Penta is 5 in Greek. So, and we have the regular cards, and then we have what are on the side the four court cards, because the symbolism of the tarot, both here and in the major arcana, is organized very largely around the medieval society. The reason for that probably being that the tarot cards have been around for a long, long time, and that so that they developed out of the symbolism of medieval society with the king and the queen and a knight and a whole bunch of others, and also the court cards, which are the king, queen, page, and knight, are known as the court cards. They are sort of the 4 chief ones. Now, so we find now, when we move from the major arcana, and they're 22, number 22 and so forth here, that we find a lot of 4s. First of all, we have 4 suits, and they are cups and pentacles and what else? Cups, pentacles, swords, and wands. And they, see, now you can see some of the suit of cups, which, and interestingly enough, if you look at the card at the top in the middle, then you'll see something that pertains to all 4 of the suits of the tarot. Namely, you have the instrument of that suit, in this case the cup, but the cup is held by a hand that comes out of a cloud in heaven, and from it run a certain number of streams of the life-giving water, so that, and these are, of course, one of the translations of these 4 suits are earth, water, fire, and air. The cup obviously being water. And now, that being the case, There we are. Now we see the swords. There too, we have a king, we have a queen, we have a knight, and then we have a page. Those are the court cards. And the others are the regular basic cards of the suit. And in it, of course, we have, being a sword, it is a weapon, it is sharp, it is pointed, it is deadly, and so we find even such things as the Ten of Swords, which it shows seemingly a corpse pierced by 10 swords, indicating the final end of something or somebody, and possibly even somebody dying. So there is some dispute among the tarot writers as to which of the 4 elements is which. And that's always a big question, especially if you study witchcraft, as to which is which is which. In any event, you have to keep that in mind. I have never been able to convince myself otherwise, and to me the suit of swords is the element of fire. I see the sword of Saint Michael, the archangel with the flaming sword, and to me it is the element of fire. Also the sharpness, the martial quality, all of that. Although now we have the suit of wands. The suit of wands, which in my estimation is related to the element of air, because the wands fly through the air and are like any instrument that you hold up high, they are related to the air, and so in each one of the suits has just a minute, has 10 basic cards, and then it has 4 court cards. And obviously the court cards are of higher value, but since they are of a particular suit, one has to consider and really to internalize as much as one can. All right, first of all, what does that suit stand for in your consciousness? To me, the suit of wands would stand for mind and intuition, the thoughts that fly through the air, you know, but to someone else they might mean something else. But so you have to develop for yourself your own interpretation of the meaning of the cards, because it can vary with the individual. And I tried, when I first addressed myself to tarot, I tried to go along with the authorities, and I tried to see the swords as being air, but I never could see them otherwise than with the flames coming out of them, the element of fire. So you probably, each person has his own symbology and can interpret it that way. But here you have now 2 of the suits. We have seen the cups, and we have seen the wands now. And so we have four suits of cards. Then we will get the now, and then we have the major arcana again. Yeah. So these 2, the major and the minor arcana together, add up to tarot deck. And I think it doesn't take a lot of imagination to say that here is a picture of the human being. We have a lesser nature, which is, according to the 4 elements, which are even recognized in depth psychology, in Jungian psychology, as the functions, sensate function, the feeling function, the thinking function, and the intuitive function. So they are the 4 functions of consciousness. The minor arcana are the human personality, which should not be taken as a derogation, because if you have ever encountered people with a bad personality, or with a personality that virtually doesn't exist, and that there you really have a cretin or an idiot. You know, if you encounter people like that, then you know how important the tarot suits are. You have to have all 4. You have to have all 4 of them developed. You have to know that and utilize the 4 functions of consciousness. And if so, then your human personality is pretty well taken care of. And then you can maybe go over now and address yourself to the major arcana. Okay, and there are the major. So let's say the symbolism that is implicit and explicit in the tarot is manifold and very, very meaningful, and if possible, one should devote as much study to its assimilation as possible, because if we become familiar in our own minds with, let's say, what does cup stand for? What does the suit of cup stand for? Well, water, okay, and what does that mean? It means feeling. The suit of hearts in the bridge deck, let us say, developed out of it, and so forth. So these are, there are the cups. We need to be aware of these and get to the point that when we see a card with cups, we immediately think of hearts, we immediately think of feeling, of emotions, things of that sort. And if these meaningful interpretations are fixed in our minds, then the laying out of cards, the tarot reading will not represent a great difficulty. But if we don't have them, then it becomes much more difficult. So we need to keep that in mind. Now there's all kinds of, just to indicate that, and there are numerous what they call tarot spreads. The issue is that then, according to certain practices, the tarot deck is shuffled, and from it are selected a certain number of cards, and that is then the spread for that particular individual. There can be very short tarot spreads. I have done 3-card spreads for a rapid, when somebody needs a rapid advice on something, that worked out quite well. But let's say there are all kinds of ways of dealing with the cards. But you have to have developed a feeling for the cards and an interior knowledge of what that card means and what it means under the circumstances, what it means for this particular person whom you are reading for, and not for Uncle Joe up the road or Aunt Fanny down the road, but that particular person. And so there are many things that are involved, and it's not a kind of crystal gazing type of thing. Oh yeah, I see you with a woman with long black hair, and she's just getting off an airplane, and any of this sort of That's a different thing, because seership, let's say in clairvoyance, exists. And sometimes it may be combined with something, with an oracle like the tarot. But on the whole, when you are divining by way of the tarot cards, then the major factors which you need to interpret are the cards that come off. And you combine that meaning that you may have learned from books or from lectures like this or others, and then you can engage in an interpretation. I assure you that it requires a certain amount of study. After all, you are dealing with a heck of a lot of cards. You are dealing with the 22 major arcana. You are dealing with, I don't know how many minor arcana, 4 times 14 minor arcana, right? Yeah. So all of this, and you have to get to the point where when you look at that card, you pretty well know what that means. And then you can add to it what it means in this particular instance. But let's say it is I need to no longer keep you here, and I will also be happy now and later on to respond to questions, and I hope that will be true of some of our other contributors, because the tarot, probably more than any other modality that I know, is, well, how should I put it? It's a social oracle. In other words, when there are several people involved, at least the reader and the readee, or maybe some others who are there, if there is an interaction of the various psyches present, the interpretation is enriched. But of course, the people who make the contribution to it should be people who know something, and not a bunch of Dummkopfs, as we call them in German, who don't know anything. So Dummkopf in German means stupid head. So that will not do. You have to be fairly smart, and you have to be intuitive, but I can assure you from the benefit of many years of being familiar with this oracle and having dealt in various ways, it is a very valuable instrumentality. It is something that can teach you about life. It is something that can teach you about a particular person. It is something that can teach you about the past, about the future, about the present. It is a fabulous teaching device.